Eastern Standard Time in what was one of the most humiliating foreign policy disasters and surrenders in American history. The last American plane took off from Hamid Karzai International Airport. U.S. forces are now officially out of the country, as are all diplomats, and Taliban terrorists are in full control of what they are calling now the Islamic Emirates of Afghanistan. Just 4 days ago, 13 brave U.S. servicemen and women lost their lives guarding that airport. And if that's not horrific enough, now Joe Biden, your president, he just left our fellow Americans behind enemy lines as hostages to the whims of terrorists. My sources are telling me that the administration's estimate of 250 to 300 Americans left behind is likely extremely low, and the more likely number of Americans left behind is closer to 1,000, maybe more. This last week's attack at the airport in Kabul, and it's because of heroes like this and thousands of Americans and our allies, well, they were able to escape the country. But tonight, countless Americans, they have now been completely abandoned and left behind enemy lines, abandoned not by our brave soldiers, but by their commander-in-chief, who made the political decision to leave by August 31st, the Taliban deadline, no matter what. It is day 16. Americans held hostage behind enemy terror.
Additional U.S. citizens and eligible Afghans who want to leave continues. There's a lot of heartbreak associated with this departure. We did not get everybody out that we wanted to get out. But I think if we'd stayed another 10 days, we wouldn't have gotten everybody out that we wanted to get out. And there still would have been people who would have been disappointed with that.
Americans held hostage behind enemy lines. Day 16.
You heard it right there. We did not get everyone out. And tonight, the administration doesn't seem to know just how many American citizens are left behind. Hundreds, if not over 1,000. The fact that they cannot give all of us an exact count is beyond repulsive. And because of the constant threat from terrorists in the Taliban and ISIS.
Came out on the last, what we call the joint tactical exfiltration, the last 5 jets to leave. We maintained the ability to bring them in up until immediately before departure, but we were not able to bring any Americans out. That activity ended probably about 12 hours before our exit, although we continued the outreach and would have been prepared to bring them on until the very last minute, but none of them made it to the airport and were able to be accommodated.
How interesting. As a candidate in 2019, Joe Biden tweeted that in the United States of America, we leave nobody behind. We need a president who understands that. Then August 19th, Joe Biden promised to stay until every American citizen was out of Afghanistan. It was only a couple of weeks ago. Apparently, Joe Biden was telling all of us an outright lie. Every American, this transcends politics. This isn't Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal. Every American should see their president lie to them right here.
The commitment holds to get everyone out that, in fact, we can get out and everyone should come out. And that's the objective. That's what we're doing now. That's the path we're on. And I think we'll get there.
So Americans should understand that troops might have to be there beyond August 31st.
No, Americans should understand that we're going to try to get it done before August 31st.
But if we don't, the troops will stay.
If we don't, we'll determine at the time who's left.
And
if Secretary of State Blinken fired, Defense Secretary Austin fired, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan fired, General Mark Milley, why he ever gave up Bagram, fired. They all need to be held responsible for this unmitigated disaster. Yeah, Joe Biden, too, fired. Breaking tonight, 90, count the numbers, 90 retired generals and admirals are also calling on Milley and Austin to resign. And if Biden had, frankly, any honor at all, if he even knew what day it is, he himself would resign right now as well. Leaving Americans behind and putting their lives in the hands of terrorists, in this case the Taliban, and probably ISIS-K and al-Qaeda, it is beyond heartless, it is cruel, it is unacceptable. This is not the American way. According to a new ABC News poll, vast majority of Americans, We don't get 84% of Americans agreeing on much at all, do we? But 84% of Americans believe U.S. troops should have stayed behind until every single American was evacuated. 71% say we should have stayed to make sure every ally of ours is evacuated also, because we promised. Let's stop lying to ourselves right here. The Taliban is a terrorist group. He said the Taliban has made believe they know that these are evil terrorists. Maybe they don't. I don't know. After all, month after month, this administration sat around, did nothing. The Taliban, we've done our time-lapse map for you. They rapidly took over the entire country. We did nothing in March, April, May, June, and July when we had control of Kabul. They did nothing as the Taliban took control of over $83 billion worth of U.S. weapons, including drones, 22,000 armored vehicles, hundreds of aircraft, and 33 Black Hawk helicopters. The Taliban now possess more Black Hawk helicopters than the entire country of Australia, and Australia got all of their citizens the hell out of there. And to top it off, Bagram Air Base was abandoned in the middle of the night, leaving thousands of American citizens completely defenseless as the Taliban closed in on Kabul. Now, it even gets worse when you think it's not possible, because according to a bombshell report in the Washington Post, not exactly a member of our vast right-wing conspiracy, the Taliban offered to stop their advance outside of Kabul, leaving control of the capital city to U.S. forces for an unknown period of time. But the Biden administration actually declined the offer and began the full-scale retreat to the airport, a location difficult to secure in the middle of the city, and it's unclear who actually made that call, as both Biden and Secretary of State Blinken, they were on vacation. Remember the vacation? They stayed on vacation during the fall of Kabul, except for a 10-minute control of the airport, not control of the perimeter, means nothing. They trusted the terrorists to protect the airport from the terrorists. That makes sense? The airport was subsequently surrounded by Taliban fighters who set up dozens of checkpoints where we now have one account after another of how they viciously beat, whipped, stabbed, gassed Americans and Afghans alike, and stopped all Afghans from going to the airport. Many of them will be murdered, and somehow a suicide bomber managed to get through to the airport gates, killing over 160, including 13 of our national treasure, our servicemen and women, injuring over 200 others. During the dignified transfer of these fallen soldiers, a very bored-looking or totally out of it Joe Biden peered down at his watch. He apparently wasn't interested in standing around for too long. And according to reports, Biden's meetings with the families of these foreign soldiers, they didn't go particularly well. According to the Washington Post, one such meeting, quote, it struck the family as scripted and shallow, a conversation that lasted only a couple of minutes in total disregard to the loss of our Marine. Tonight, everyone in the Biden administration, from Joe and Kamala and to the propagandist Jen Psaki, Tony Blinken, should all be hanging their heads in shame. All of this self-inflicted, all of it preventable. Because of them, 13 of our servicemen and women are dead, many others seriously injured, and now we have an untold amount, in the hundreds, maybe thousands of Americans that now have been left behind enemy lines of terrorists. With American forces gone, there is no one left to protect these Americans or any of our friends or allies from the Taliban's death squads that are now, as the thing that everybody needs to understand, even if you completely agree with the Biden administration's decision to withdraw, the way they have handled this has been a total bleeping disaster. Here with more, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. Never thought, Colonel, never thought we'd leave Americans behind terrorist enemy lines. Never thought we'd leave them to the Taliban, ISIS-K, and al-Qaeda. But we did, and we don't even know how many.
Well, that's true, Sean, which is different than what the administration's been saying all along, as you pointed out. You know, one of the things that they missed out on when General McKenzie gave that briefing was that the aircraft departed at the time they did to comply with the deadline set by the Taliban. So that 11 young U.S. Marines, the Navy corpsman, and the Army soldier died in an effort to evacuate American citizens who could not get to the airport. Claim success and congratulate themselves. But there's not going to be any backslapping for the families and loved ones of those 13 American homes. Nor will there be any comfort for those now in hiding from the Taliban death squads. The brutal terrorist organizations, plural, now running Afghanistan, are now far better armed than any criminal enterprise in history. Our homeland is now at greater risk than it's ever been, despite what the State Department and the Pentagon and the White House say. The, quote, new government, unquote, in Kabul is now being helped by Russian GRU officers intercepting cell phone calls from those begging for help getting out. And what they're doing is they're targeting. That's why you hear those gunshots. They know where to go to find the cell phone because that person was calling somebody in the States in a plea to get out. You got intelligence officers in Pakistan and the People's Republic of China now pawing through stockpiles of U.S. weapons, aircraft, sensitive military equipment for shipping it to China, where it's going to be reverse engineered and exploited. On Sunday, August 29th, during that solemn ceremony at Dover Air Force Base, the commander-in-chief checked his watch. What was he trying to figure out? How much longer he'd have to stay with those 13 heartbroken families? In the final days before all the U.S. troops were withdrawn, State Department, Pentagon, White House press secretaries all told us the airport gates were open to those who wanted to get out. That was never true. First of all, the Taliban flushed as many people as they could down those roads, the airport road, to crowd around, so it would make it more difficult. Then, at each one of their checkpoints, they were looking for people's documents. What we call SIVs, the special immigrant visas that was theoretically going to be given to all of our Terps, didn't get to most of them, and all those who worked for us in Afghanistan, they got intercepted. Many of them were executed, certain death for those who didn't, $1,500 of money to be allowed to those who did pass. At one point, members of Congress had to get in touch with the White House counsel to alert the president to the need to open some of the gates. And we just revealed, just by the general, 12 hours the gates were closed. So at the time the country needed a strong president, we got a weak and inept politician. At a time when we needed a courageous leader, we got a bumbling coward. At a time when we needed a truth teller at the White House, we got habitual liars. As a result, American military families are grieving, and the blood of their loved ones is on Joe Biden's hands. The president tried to defend his callow handling of the Afghan bug-out by blaming Donald Trump for negotiating with the Taliban. He conveniently ignored the important point that Trump negotiated from a position of strength based on conditions on the ground. This is horrible. Biden, on the other hand, has negotiated with the Taliban from a position of weakness, on his knees. And just one last thought. At one point he said about the terrorists that had killed those 13 Americans, he said he wouldn't forget. He was not going to forgive. And he would bring them to justice. We ought to say that about Joe Biden right now.
Wow, powerful. Colonel North, we appreciate you. Thank you, sir. Joining us now, Fox Nation host Lara Logan, Congressman Dan Crenshaw. Lara, I like your piece. You have been very firm in saying the Taliban is a terrorist group. Now we've left Americans behind. And I was told tonight by one prominent senator, and it's been confirmed by others, it's not 2,000 or 5,000 Afghans. They have the intel over 10,000 at least. That are now set to be murdered. They will be killed one by one. They will be tracked down. They know who they are. They even have biometrics to identify them.
They don't just have biometrics, Sean. The Russians are helping them with geofencing. So anytime a call is made and that number pops up on the net, the Russians are able to locate it precisely and hand that to the Taliban. They're also working with Chinese hackers. They're using British technology that was supplied to the Pakistani ISI by the British. And he is being in Raqqa because ISIS made a big show about it. But if you actually study Al-Qaeda's works and you see how they have functioned as a clandestine intelligence organization. Their goal has been to send their ideology all over the world. And they are celebrating now. Do you know that some of the most senior leaders of Al-Qaeda, who somehow we couldn't find, we could find that ISIS, a bomb maker, right? We could find the one that was supposedly responsible for that explosion. And we killed an interpreter. An Afghan interpreter for Special Operations Forces was killed in that drone strike. The funeral was in eastern Afghanistan today. So we found these people very quickly. But in 20 years, we couldn't find all the senior leadership of Al-Qaeda who were being sheltered in Pakistan. Billions of dollars to the Pakistanis, year after year. We helped them kill our own soldiers, and we couldn't find any of the leaders that were responsible. And you know, Sean, I have friends tonight, people that worked for me at 60 Minutes, worked with me. I have people who are high risk, vulnerable targets who work very closely with the U.S. military, with special operations forces. They're in hiding now, trying to make it through the night. Do you know what it's like to have them screaming down the phone, begging for help, begging you, please, America, don't do this? I have videos of Afghan women trapped outside the airport, begging Joe Biden, please, Biden, save us, please save us. I mean, how did it come to this? Do you know, the special operations community is reeling. Sean, I know that you speak to a lot of these guys as well. I know Colonel North does too. Dan Crenshaw, you do as well. There are literally like entire battalions strength in numbers of Americans who are flying into Afghanistan to rescue people, who are going into the region, who are risking everything. It is like people are just, they're not even thinking about anything else except that they know that this is wrong. And the worst part is to see that general, how dare he, how dare these people in the administration stand there and pretend that this absolute Armageddon isn't happening.
Any faith, Dan Crenshaw, that the Taliban will help Americans get out? Do you see any option at all now that our diplomatic side is gone? Every American soldier is gone. They're left behind enemy lines. Do you see any hope? Do you think the Taliban will help Americans get out now? Because I don't.
No, and one of the most infuriating things we saw this week was Secretary of State Antony Blinken saying, you know, we're going to get Americans out. We're going to use our leverage. Well, what leverage? I mean, we barely had any leverage when we had 5,000 troops there these last couple of weeks in Kabul airport. What leverage do we have now? You know, what are we going to sign a mean letter from the international community and say, you know, we're going to be real upset with you, like it's Model UN or something? This is ridiculous. We have no leverage. In fact, we gave them pallets of cash. We gave them billions of dollars worth of our weaponry. We have no leverage with them anymore. And this gets to a broader problem. It's not just that our American citizens are at risk now in Afghanistan. It's not just that our allies are at risk now. Everything Lara just said is true. They're hunting them down. They have every intention of hunting them down. We had a video today of one of our Black Hawk helicopters with somebody hanging from it as it moves through the sky. You know, they probably have a gun to an Afghan army soldier's head, a pilot, to pilot that thing. And that's how they're doing this. So, no, we have no leverage, and we have no ability to get people out now. And worse than that, we have no ability to deny terrorists safe haven. You know, if there's one thing we got for the last 20 years, it was no more 9/11s. And that's not nothing. That's something. And we have no ability, these over-the-horizon ops, these special operations ops that they're talking about, you can't do that with no airfields nearby, with no eyes and ears on the ground. It's a fantasy. And I think America's less safe because of it.
It's going to get worse. I hope to God I'm wrong. I pray for our fellow Americans that we abandon. No, we didn't abandon. Joe Biden abandoned, and his team abandoned. Thank you both. When we come back, you'll meet two Gold Star fathers, their sons killed in Afghanistan serving this country last week. Plus, who's really running the Biden White House? Eric Trump has a lot to say. He'll weigh in as we continue. Please stay with us. And tonight we're continuing to remember the American heroes lost in last week's terror attack at Karzai International Airport in Kabul. 13 brave men and women from all across the country, as young as 20 years old, made the ultimate sacrifice, serving their country with honor, bravery. The moment represented the best, the very best our country has to offer. And quite frankly, they deserve so much better than this, and better than to have Joe Biden look down and check his watch during the dignified transfer of remains over the weekend. Joining me now, they're two Gold Star fathers. They lost their sons in last week's attack. Mark Schmitz, he's the father of Lance Corporal Jared Schmitz, and Darren Hoover, the father of Staff Sergeant Darren Hoover Jr., who went by the name of Taylor. Let me start with you, Mark, if I may. Your son was sent back to Afghanistan to assist with the evacuation efforts. You said it's something you always wanted to do. I never have seen a young man train as hard as he did to be the best soldier he could be. He went back just for this mission. Explain.
Yes, he did. First, I just want to say that Jared has exemplified so much that any man could ever strive for, and made me so proud to watch him undertake this endeavor and going into the Marine Corps. And he completed his boot camp, went to Jordan, was excited about that, and was constantly looking to.
I can't imagine the pain that both of you are living through, and I'm very sorry about that. Mark, you met with Biden over the weekend. How did that go?
Well, initially I wasn't going to meet with him, but then I felt I owed it to my son to at least have some words with him about how I felt, and it didn't go well. He talked a bit more about his own son.
Stands this: no parent should have to bury their sons or daughters. Imagine how you're feeling today.
You know, it's the absolute worst feeling in the world. Having them be away for so long and doing the job that they all love, there's no doubt about it. Being a Marine to these guys is everything. And having this happen to these heroes, every one of them's a hero. There's no doubt. Every last one of them. They died with their brothers and their sisters right next to them, doing exactly what they all wanted to do, and that is defending this country.
America's national treasure. That's how I refer to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
You chose not to meet with President Biden. I don't know if you want to comment on that. And I'd like to know, when I saw Biden look at his watch, I was literally like, you got to be kidding me. Because all of this to me was preventable. Because we saw them on the march. You know, we had April, May, June, July to extradite everybody and our equipment. We didn't do it. There's no excuse to me for this. Why did you choose not to meet with the president, Darren?
For exactly the reasons you just gave. We said absolutely not. We didn't want to deal with him. We didn't want him anywhere near us. We as a family decided that that was the way it was going to be. In reference to the checking of his watch, that didn't happen just once. That happened on every single one that came out of that airplane. It happened on every single one of them. They would release the salute, and he looked down at his watch on every last one, all 13. He looked down at his watch. And as a father, you know, seeing that and the disrespect and hearing from his former leaders, one of his master sergeants said exactly what you just said, that this was avoidable, that they left them over there, they had them over there and let them down. And that we can't have that. It can't happen ever again.
We also abandoned Americans. Americans now are on their own. We left them behind. Mark, you want to comment on the watch incident? Did you notice the same thing?
Yes, I did. I actually leaned into my son's mother's ear and I said, I swear to God, if he checks his watch one more time, and that was only probably 4 times in, I couldn't look at him anymore after that. Just considering especially the time and why we were there, it was I found to be the most disrespectful thing I've ever seen.
I know there are no words that any commentator or host could express that's going to take your pain away. But I can tell you, this audience shares in your anger and shares in a deep appreciation and thankfulness and sadness at an unnecessary loss of life, I believe, in this case. And we'll be praying for all of you, your families, these incredible young men that you raised that made this country the greatest country on earth. They make the country great. There's some leaders that don't make the country great. They did. Our thoughts and prayers are with you both. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Darren.